The series.
Saturday night on BBC One. At 5 to 6 is the Generation Game. Then at 10 to 7, Dog Eat Dog. At 7:25, it's the National Lottery winning lines. Plus the lottery draws live. New Blood and Casualty at 8:10.
What can I do?
You the Aussie?
Lara Stone.
You can watch.
At 9, they're back.
She's been taken over by some evil, twisted being that for some unfathomable reason finds you sexually alluring.
In a new series of Randall and Hopkirk.
I remember thinking, I want to be famous.
And at 10:10, Parky meets Victoria Wood, Anne Widdecombe and Sir Bob Geldof. That's Saturday night on BBC One.
Just popping over.
What?
In 17 seconds, Kitty made a lifetime of difference. BBC Children in Need needs you to start your fundraising now. Please call for a supporters pack on 0845 607 3333.
Because I'm Teddy, we've got a chance.
Raise a smile for children across the UK with BBC Children in Need, November 16th.
Every day, millions of people are caught on camera. Most of them have nothing to hide, but you may recognize some that do. Your call counts. Crime Watch UK, tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
This is BBC One in the East Midlands. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Michael Burke and Joe Healy.
The Americans say they're not planning a massive military attack. There'll be no D-Day. The build-up continues, but NATO's told it'll be a long and broad campaign. The Afghans have sacked and burnt the American embassy in Kabul. The last remains of the Trade Center brought down a memorial for the dead. The girl whose horrifying death may be a turning point in child protection. And Liverpool finish off Dynamo Kiev in the Champions League.
Here in the East Midlands, a gun's fired outside a school. The coach driver waiting to pick up children saved by his windscreen. And the French say a police swoop here has netted an international terror suspect.
Good evening. The war against terrorism has been declared, but the Americans are now playing down the idea that it will begin with an early and massive military strike against Afghanistan. US defense officials briefed NATO in Brussels today and said their forces would not be lashing out in retaliation. They didn't ask NATO itself to join any collective military operation. Instead, they talked of a measured campaign on many levels. There would be no D-Day. In the fallout of the war on terrorism, the United Nations is appealing for $250 million to help 7.5 million Afghan refugees survive the freezing winter. Airlines are continuing to suffer. Another 20,000 jobs are being cut at Delta, Air Canada and the Scandinavian airline SAS. And in the hunt for the terrorists, the FBI has asked Scotland Yard to look into 100 leads in Britain. But our first report tonight is from Washington and Stephen Sacker.
President Bush en route to CIA headquarters. If only the road to victory in the war on terror was so direct. Normally secretive CIA staff came out of the shadows to give him a warm welcome. He told them to prepare for a sustained undercover war.
It is a war that requires the best of intelligence. You see, the enemy is, they like to hide. They think they can hide. But we know better.
A demonstration of U.S. firepower in North Carolina. For days now, the American military has been deploying strike aircraft closer to Afghanistan, very publicly flexing some muscle. But Washington's message is ambiguous. Even the administration's hawks are trying to limit expectations.
There's not going to be a D-Day as such. This is not something that begins with a significant event or ends with a significant event. It is something that will involve a sustained effort over a good period of time.
White House photographs give us a glimpse inside George Bush's war cabinet. Last week, the president seemed to come close to calling for the overthrow of Afghanistan's Taliban government. Today, Colin Powell, identified as the most cautious voice in the Bush team, subtly refined the administration's message.
Hopefully, a better day is ahead for the Afghan people, but right now I'm not prepared to say, nor is the United States government prepared to say, how they might be governed in the future or what might be the fate of the Taliban regime.
Captain Victor Saraceni.
Another memorial this afternoon for the air crews lost in the terror attacks. Emotions are still running high, but there is also a willingness to wait for the president's military response, an appreciation that this is no ordinary war. Every day there is renewed speculation here about the timing of an American military strike. But the key question isn't when, it is how. The more the Bush team analyzes its options, the more it emphasizes that there will be no quick and easy military solution. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, at the White House.
The United States told NATO allies that it needs more information on how to find Osama bin Laden and his followers and asked for their help in gathering intelligence. The US Deputy Defense Secretary briefed NATO partners on the global campaign against terrorism, but emphasized non-military options at this stage. James Robbins reports on the aims of the war against terrorism.
The weapons of war are still being assembled as America and her allies debate their aims, how far they should go. These tornadoes left RAF Leeming in North Yorkshire today for the Gulf, for exercises, but also to be available for action. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, America made clear Britain is one of very few member states who are frontline allies. And this will be a war run from Washington, not from NATO. Most members will be relied on for political support and intelligence help through a long and still undefined campaign.
And it was also recognized during our discussion that the campaign against terrorism will be long, arduous, and will require radical new thinking. Adaptability, non-conventional thinking, patience and determination are key elements for this campaign.
So what are the aims of this very different campaign? The enemy is clear, terrorists and those who harbour or support them, although agreeing on who are terrorists could still divide a global coalition. The weapons of war are more than just military, they're also financial and diplomatic to try to choke terrorist groups. And the primary targets, Osama bin Laden and the Taliban regime which shelters him in Afghanistan. But is the regime to be toppled or just weakened? The coalition includes strange bedfellows. In Shanghai, they're not just printing round the clock to cash in on record demand from America for flags. China is pledging the US general support against terror. And then there's Iran, powerful voice in the Muslim world, sending very mixed signals. Today they were chanting death to America for the first time since September the 11th, as Ayatollah Khamenei, supreme leader, led a fight back by the hardline Muslim clerics. But the country is being taken in the opposite direction by Iran's president and government. They were repeating qualified support for action against terrorism to an EU delegation in Tehran today. The extraordinary shape and breadth of the coalition alarms Israel's Prime Minister most of all. Ariel Sharon reluctantly met Britain's Foreign Secretary late last night. Mr. Sharon feels isolated, watching those he calls terrorists like Iran being wooed by the West as vital Muslim allies. But in a BBC interview to be shown tomorrow, the man who led Britain through the Gulf War 10 years ago defended the current strategy.
One needs the broadest possible coalition. Countries all over the world are threatened by terrorism. A number of the Arab states are directly threatened by terrorism. It isn't just a threat against the West. It's a threat that goes almost everywhere.
And the threat will be countered. In Tajikistan, Russian troops still train close to the Afghan border. They won't fight themselves, but America is being given access to launch future attacks across this frontier, but only when strategy has been finalized. James Robbins, BBC News.
And Stephen Sacker is at the White House now. Stephen, there is a new note of caution today from Washington. Is that because, to put it crudely, the doves are getting the upper hand over the hawks?
Well, Mike, there's been an awful lot of talk about doves and hawks inside the Bush administration over the last few days, but I would say for the time being that characterization isn't particularly relevant. What matters is that all of them are very rapidly becoming realists, because as they look at the different military options in front of them for the particular task of finding the perpetrators of the terror on September the 11th and punishing them, they realize that all the military options are pretty bad and pretty difficult. That's turning Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, the key hawks, into realists. It's making Colin Powell sound very sensible and pragmatic, and he's always been the most cautious. So for the time being, I think there's unity around George Bush, unity around the recognition that this task is difficult.
If where to start is proving difficult, what about where to stop? Is the consensus at least on that?
No, there isn't. I think that's where the consensus breaks down, because if you think of this as a play or drama of sorts, then everybody agrees on Act 1. Act 1 should be the reaching and the punishment of those responsible for September 11th. But when you go beyond that, some of the team around Bush want to bring in Saddam Hussein. They want to punish global terror. They see Saddam Hussein, for example, as very much a linchpin of that terror. Colin Powell, the more cautious voice, doesn't want to go that far. He thinks it'll destroy the coalition. That debate is ongoing, and it certainly has not been settled.
Stephen Sackur, thanks. Thousands of Taliban supporters stormed the abandoned American embassy in the Afghan capital, Kabul, and set fire to the building. The Taliban supreme leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, told his people that American attacks were now less likely because he said there was no hard evidence against Osama bin Laden. In northern Afghanistan, where an opposition alliance is fighting the Taliban, heavy new clashes have been reported. Jackie Rowland is in Afghanistan.